So I had a conversation with a coworker this past Friday. I told him that I voted for Ralph Nader in 2000 and 2004 and explained why. He offered the typical derisitory comments as a joke, but then he asked me, "So, you voted for Nader both times in hopes of trying to make the Democrats field a better candidate?" And I said, "Yes." Then he asked, "So do you think they did a good job this time?" In 2006, I made a video advocating the position of voting for third parties. I don't think of it as a protest vote, but a strategic vote. What I'm hoping for is that the mainstream parties, which I felt were in a state of major degeneration, would see reasonable numbers of people voting for these third parties. This should motivate them to adopt the positions advocated by the third parties in order to reclaim the support from those third parties. Kerry and Gore were terrible candidates, so I felt fully justified in voting for Nader in 2000 and 2004. The idea of voting to stop Bush is buying into the false dichotomy set up by the system and denying myself the opportunity to apply pressure to the Democratic Party in the way I want to. But Nader has not proposed anything significant beyond his ideology this time around. On his website, he lists a number of issues he claims are off the table from the main political parties, as well as strange things like Tibetan rights, none of which are central to U.S. policy. When asked about the $700 billion bailout of the banks, he answered ideologically. Why only give the money to the speculators instead of those whose homes have been foreclosed? That's fine, and in principle I even agree with where he's coming from, but that's not actually what the question is about. He didn't even really understand why the $700 billion package was created in the first place, meaning he didn't bother to take the time to understand the reason for the package in order to come up with some kind of nuanced response to it. He had no powerful message this time around. The old least worst argument simply does not apply. So, turning our attention to Barack Obama. He has progressive democratic leanings which I'm ideologically aligned with. But most importantly, he's highly intelligent. These factors together make him the most ideal presidential candidate that could actually win that I have ever had the opportunity to support. His healthcare plan, while not state-based single-payer, which is what I'm for, is at least an attempt at a universal system. This isn't just an issue for sick people, it's an issue for businesses that are otherwise incurring costs for lost labor from sick employees or being forced to offer their own health care plans out of their own pockets. Small businesses can't afford a health care plan that is comparable to those offered by larger corporations, and so they have a harder time competing for employees. So on energy policy, he's talked about supporting renewable energy as the primary way of becoming energy independent. He correctly wants to stay away from nuclear and is no fan of offshore or Alaskan oil drilling. We can't drill our way out of the problem. And on tax policy, he wants to raise taxes on people making more than $250K as a means of funding his ideas and to fund a tax cut that he wants to give to people making less than $250K. This used to be just known as the progressive tax system. I just call it sensible. The only arguments you ever hear against this are cliched arguments. So I'll just list them. Number one, Democrats are tax and spenders, which is a line that McCain has repeated. This has to be contrasted with Republicans who are deficit spenders. That is to say, the main difference that the Republicans take on here is rather than taxing people to pay for their programs, they borrow it from China and Saudi Arabia instead. It's not exactly the responsible position to be taking. The second thing they usually say, or the cliched response is, by taxing the rich, you are engaging in class warfare. In other words, taxing rich people is inherently unfair. So unfair, in fact, that it makes you wonder where the rich people will get the next meal. The income gap between rich and poor in the U.S. has been rising ridiculously in the past 30 years. If anything, the rich have declared open warfare against the poor a long time ago. The third cliched response is that somehow this will hurt small businesses. This is just blatantly untrue. If all the employees of a business make less than $250K, then it has no effect on them whatsoever. Even in large businesses, only executives who make more than that are affected by it, not the fundamental corporation itself. Which is entirely the point of doing this. Okay, so McCain couldn't point out a concrete problem with Obama's tax policy. He resorted to classical Republican rhetoric whenever he responded to it, and that just doesn't stand the scrutiny. Another idea Obama put forward is that we have to talk to other nations. I think this is a good idea. McCain tried to spin this into claiming it was some fatal gaffe by emphasizing that Obama didn't explain that there should be preconditions to meetings with other countries. But in the end, McCain's attempt was really to distract people from the realization that McCain's own position is either isolationist or as bankrupt as Bush's. This has actually been a long-term bee in my bonnet. We as a country have artificially created enemies by not talking to various countries like Cuba, Iran, and Venezuela. The reason we've isolated Cuba, for example, is because they were funded by the Soviet Union. I wonder if anybody has passed around a memo to the White House explaining to them that the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. Of course, we do have good relationships with Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Indonesia, and Saudi Arabia. So it's not like we pick countries according to the quality of their government. And of course, with the Bush doctrine, we've managed to pick up real prizes like Libya, who was scared into trying opening up a peaceful relationship with the U.S. You know, I'm glad we're at peace with the tent city. I'm sure there's some social or strategic benefit to being pals with these guys that I'm just unaware of. So Obama talks about helping the poor, which, whether people realize it or not, is fundamental to the strength of our economy. For people who haven't figured this out, poor people have a much higher spending to investment or saving ratio in their use of money. And the economy is bootstrapped by spending. Without it, investment is just a sophisticated pyramid scheme. Okay, so Obama also ties technology with the need to improve education in our country. He says he wants to tie accountability with reward, which speaks very exactly to how I see the issue. Higher pay for teachers should definitely happen, but it should be coupled with performance. Not through ebonics or unfunded mandates or through backdoor government subsidizing of private schools through vouchers. So he and I see eye to eye on that. On the war, Obama says he'll try to get out of Iraq in a credible way, but on the other hand, he says he wants to divert our military's attention to going after Osama bin Laden. So he's not just ideologically against war. The incident of 9/11 left some loose ends, and we need to take care of it in ways that the current administration has not taken seriously. I'm not sure McCain would take it seriously either. On the $700 billion bailout, he didn't initially say anything until he understood the issue. Banks need liquidity, otherwise they can't function, and a mass selling spree would be forced upon the stock market. We would have been forced into a crippling depression from which we couldn't recover with what was remaining of the infrastructure. And that's what it was for. Obama seemed to understand the issue, at least as well as I do, which is superior to most of the Republicans, some of the Democrats, and all of Nader, Kucinich, or McKinney. So I have to consider, would an intelligent Republican be as compelling as a candidate? I would probably be unable to vote for a Republican under normal circumstances, but McCain came pretty close at one point. The McCain from 2000-2002 time frame, seems to be quite a respectable centrist conservative politician. I saw him chair some committees on C-SPAN, and he really seemed like an honest politician just trying to get a job done, with consideration for real issues. But in seeking the Republican nomination, he's run to the right. In fact, there appears to be nothing left of his centrism visible at all from him in 2008. People I talked to at work have put forth the theory that McCain is actually starting to fade cognitively as well. And it's not easy to discount this theory based on what I'm seeing and what I've seen from him in the past. By now it's cliche to say this, but McCain is essentially running as Bush. Perhaps he's hoping to win in the same way. He doesn't seem to realize that Obama is a lot better than both Kerry and Gore, and that Americans realize this. On policy, McCain on energy says he supports nuclear and offshore, than the Alaskan oil drilling. These antisocial distractions should not be put on the same table as real sustainable energy proposals. McCain also thinks that healthcare can somehow be solved by corporations. It's like he doesn't understand that there's no corporate equation that motivates an organization to fork over a lot of cash for an expensive operation to workers towards the end of their useful, employable life. There is actually some logic to socializing healthcare. And this is what he puts on his website. John McCain will create a Service to America initiative to strengthen the teaching and understanding of American history, culture, and core ideas, and to inspire Americans to serve causes greater than their own self-interest. In other words, he wants to promote teaching patriotism, as if we don't have enough of that in this country. I mean, maybe this is useful for history students or something like that. I'm wondering what aspiring engineers or medical students think of such a thing. Anyways, he thinks on the issue of technology, he thinks it will be spurred by loosening corporate regulations and by further bolstering American intellectual property laws around the world. As a high-tech worker myself, the depth of this stupidity is hard to express. Technology is spurred on by the disruptive technology model, which has nothing to do with corporate regulations, and if anything is hindered by intellectual property. His other positions don't deserve the time spent on explaining them. McCain is just bad for America, maybe as bad as Bush. Nader is not a serious candidate on multiple levels. One, he lacks serious ideas, and two, his understanding of the economic bailout is rivaled only by Palin's understanding of the bailout. Barack Obama is more than just good for the country. He's the best presidential candidate that I have seen in my entire lifetime, and I consequently think that he would be likely the best president that I would ever live through. And of course, I hope and expect that he is going to win. But Barack Obama brings one last very special and important side effect to our country. The United States is a country that grew up with slavery and racism. On paper, we've mostly put that behind us, but as we've seen from this campaign, pockets of it still exist, and we know it's always lurking beneath the surface in our society. As a country, we've not yet nailed the coffin on this issue. Barack Obama represents the greatest possible role model for young Americans imaginable. It greatly saddens me that young African Americans growing up today think that Shaquille O'Neal or Michael Jackson or Al Sharpton or Denzel Washington are people that they look up to. They don't look up to Bill Gates, Noam Chomsky, Richard Dawkins, or Donald Knuth because they don't think they can be that sort of person. African Americans, and in fact all Americans, used to have a role model that they could look up to who was at the standard of Barack Obama. That role model changed people's dreams. But if our president is African American, and in fact the best president America has had for the past 40 years is an African American, I think that totally changes the entire social equation. I think he would change people's dreams again. Also consider the young white person who's being influenced by racist ideas. Perhaps people are telling him that there's something wrong with blacks or other ethnicities, that they don't measure up in some way. That young person will have to consider that the most articulate, intelligent, charismatic person that they've ever seen in their lives is always on their TV set leading our country. It might be early to say this, but we might be seeing the beginning of the real end to racism in America. So I told my coworker, yes, I think they did a good job this time. To be later.